So this is the final video of the three, and this looks at something which was an absolute blessing to my parents and indeed to me, a real godsend, and that is vaccination. One of the big problems today is because we don't see these diseases on a sort of an everyday occurrence as we did when I was a kid. Lots of people decide not to get their children vaccinated, or can't be bothered to get their children vaccinated basically. But the only reason these diseases aren't about is because of vaccination. Anyway, that looks at that.
So whilst the National Health Service is still well in the news, how to help the National Health Service Part 3, and this is about vaccination. When I was 3, I suffered from diphtheria, a killer of children, and spent many weeks in an isolation hospital, miles from anywhere. I mean, nobody had cars, you know. I mean, my parents couldn't come and visit me. My parents' generation, and to a lesser extent mine, lived in utter dread of a multitude of diseases year on year, especially polio, which tended to appear at swimming baths in the summer. I mean, this COVID flu would have been a serious business, but it certainly wouldn't have provoked the reaction we've seen today. When I was school age, there were many people with dreadful coughs, bringing up long strings of green gunge and blood from deep within their lungs, which they then spat onto the pavement. They were suffering from the great scourge of the poor, consumption or tuberculosis, TB. The spit dried and the spores were carried about in the wind to infect others. It's a disease of overcrowding and poverty found in slum dwellings in cities. I mean, every bus where the conductor stood used to have a sign, a big sign saying, "No spitting." It was thought that it could be cured by breathing in pure air at altitude, and huge hospitals were built to accommodate TB sufferers, and they were called sanatoria. If you were rich, you went to Switzerland, but most urban hospital boards built sanatoria in the countryside surrounding their area. Middlesbrough was called Poole Sanatorium, and it was at Nunthorpe. And that is it. Now flattened, and a very nice housing estate. Every day for months, irrespective of the weather. I mean, they had sort of a covered area which they could wheel you out into. Patients were wheeled outside in their beds for the fresh air. There's a photograph of them there. I don't know where it is. I mean, many improved, mainly because of the good food. The extra vitamin D they got from lying in the sunshine, and excellent nursing. But few were ever cured, and many of them died very, very young. But until the late 1960s, there were sort of walk-in centres where you could be x-rayed for TB. You just sort of wandered in off the street. They also picked up lung cancer, but that was a sort of side issue. And I remember it in Middlesbrough, it was on Grange Road. But TB hasn't disappeared. In 2015, London was the tuberculosis capital of Europe, with 2,500 cases, which was about a quarter of the total number in the United Kingdom. In 2018, there were 8,000 identified cases of tuberculosis in the United Kingdom. So it lingers on. In the 1950s and 60s, it was common to see children with a big, heavy, built-up shoe because one leg had stopped growing, sort of limping along and dragging this thing behind them on a withered leg. Many children had leg calipers and they were sort of staggering along on crutches. Some spent months, if not years, in fact some spent the rest of their lives, in sort of big clanking machines called iron lungs, which breathed for them, because they couldn't breathe themselves. Their muscles were paralysed. And there were wards full of them. Places like this, line after line, where you could only see your surroundings through a sort of mirror angled above your head. I mean, some never walked again. They had what was called infantile paralysis, which we know better as poliomyelitis or polio. And of course in underdeveloped countries it was even worse because they didn't have health services. And when you're travelling abroad you often see unfortunate people sort of scuffling about, unable to stand up. In 1957, a Dr. Salk, an American, he produced his polio vaccine, and we all trooped down to the health centre from school, and there were no refuseniks. Everybody went. And here you can see a cure. This is in America, but it was the same in England. Notice how many children there are there. One of those horrendous diseases was smallpox. You see it there. Ghastly, absolutely ghastly. I mean, even if you survived it, you were left with hideous scarring where the pox had been. I mean, in 1953 in Bradford, and again in 1962 in Bradford and North Wales, there was an outbreak of smallpox. And it was very quickly stopped by prompt isolation and ring vaccination. It was the local chap in charge of the health in Bradford who was very prompt in his actions. I mean, I was in Bradford at the time and remember the panic and the massive queue for the vaccine. This is the headline in the local paper, and the guy on the left is the man who very, very quickly snuffed it out, which was just as well. And there were massive queues for the vaccine. You can see all the way down past the newspaper offices and way, way beyond down the road there. People who thought the disease had disappeared and never bothered to get vaccinated. They quickly changed their minds. And in 1981, after a long and difficult campaign by the World Health Organization, smallpox was finally eradicated worldwide. The names of the last two people who suffered from the disease, both of them survived, I think, one in Bangladesh and one somewhere down in the Horn of Africa, is known to children. Such fame. We all suffered from measles, mumps, rubella, whooping cough and others. I mean, most recovered, but some didn't. And many of those who survived were left with lasting damage, and many babies as a result of rubella were born with really serious problems. And there were other killer diseases we lived with, including things like tetanus, diphtheria and meningitis. The discovery of vaccines has reduced the incidence of these to a sort of a distant memory, thank goodness. But they haven't gone away. And they're waiting for their moment, given half a chance. For those who had seen the effects of these diseases, vaccination was a godsend. What a relief. Well, you'd think that would be the end of it. You'd think it would be sort of common sense to get your children vaccinated, or get vaccinated yourself, go for the flu vaccine every winter. But it isn't the end of it. We now have vaccination resistance. I mean, ever since the introduction of vaccination by Jenner way back in the 1700s, I think it was about 1790, there's been some resistance to it, which you could understand in those days. But today, it's more prevalent than ever. I mean, in Jenner's time, this cartoon, this amusing cartoon, appeared. See people sort of cows' heads appearing out of their out of them. You got one on the end of his nose. But it was a very serious business. I talk about Jenner in another video, which will be to come. Efforts to eradicate polio have been severely hampered by religious groups, particularly in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan, some of whose group leaders, sort of religious leaders, see it as a Western plot to sterilize the population and reduce the numbers. And this is a quote from some document, and to avert the will of Allah. I mean, 60 medics working on the World Health Organization polio eradication program, I mean, they're trying to get rid of it across the world, a bit like they've done with smallpox. 60 of these medics have been murdered in Taliban-held regions of the world. But recent news would suggest that there have been signs of a breakthrough, thank goodness. And there have been similar actions in northern Nigeria, Tanzania and in Cameroon. The BCG vaccine, which is for tuberculosis, it's produced from cows, which of course makes it a problem for Hindus who see cows as sacred. But tuberculosis is absolutely rife in India, which is the mainstay of the Hindu religion. We might conclude that such objections are bizarre, and due to the lack of education of men, particularly in a patriarchal society, or where those in power feel that their hold on the people is threatened in some way. I mean, the power of the traditional shaman, for instance. However, the resistance to vaccination also has a long history in Western cultures. I mean, most are centred on the rights of the individual over the rights of the rest of the populace. In particular, where compulsory vaccination is enforced by law, or where failure to immunise your children results in penalties, such as not allowing them to go to school. I mean, that's come up again recently in France and Australia. It's a very vexed issue, and it was thrown into the public spotlight in 1998 when the eminent medical journal Lancet published an article by a Dr. Wakefield, who, having looked at 12 cases, said that there was a link between autism and the measles, mumps and rubella vaccine, the MMR vaccine, particularly the mumps part of it. And uptake of the vaccine just collapsed, and the diseases proliferated, resulting in serious illness and deaths. Subsequently, it was discovered that he had a financial interest in promoting his view, and that his investigation into the link between MMR and autism was totally flawed. In 2010, which was 12 long years after the publication, he was struck off as a doctor, having, and I quote, misled the journal, and the British Medical Journal described his work as a total fraud. But Wakefield, he's still around, I think he's in Canada, has continued to deny any wrongdoing, and as a layman he continues to promote this, his view, his theory. Even 20 plus years later, overcoming the suspicion he generated is proving to be very difficult. The National Health Service only offers the MMR vaccine. Those who want the separate measles and rubella vaccines but don't want the mumps bit, they have to go private, and they've got to pay for them. They don't come cheap. The current price, which is 2020 for a measles jab, is about £120. If you want the measles and rubella combined jab, it's £150. But in addition to that, there's the cost of the consultation, which lasts about half an hour, and it's £150 as well. I mean, many argue, including, to my surprise, some educated parents, that these diseases are rare, therefore vaccination is not needed. I mean, such people are often referred to as free riders, relying on the immunity of other children whose parents had them vaccinated to protect their own. So why is this important? Well, the fall in vaccinations means that the herd immunity threshold isn't reached, and the lurking disease organism, it leaps back with a vengeance, sweeping through the non-vaccinated individuals given half a chance. Today the NHS offers, I think it's 15 vaccinations for children and several for adults. I mean, people of my age, you can get the flu vaccine and the shingles vaccine. Unless there's a medical course for not being vaccinated, to refuse to have children vaccinated and rely on the children who have been vaccinated to protect them is, well, as it says there are words I could say, but I don't think it's suitable for this video. Measles is rearing its ugly head again, with vaccination falling to 87% when it should be 95% for herd immunity. And the United Kingdom has lost its World Health Organization measles-free status, lost it in 2019. All the indications are that measles will be the next health scare. Cases of measles have been rising, and a major outbreak will see a stampede by free riders to have their children vaccinated, so adding to the pressure on the health services. I mean, vaccines offer protection against an ever-increasing number of diseases. And if you want to help the NHS, help it by having your children vaccinated and keep your own up to date. And there's a little bit of good news from the 24th of April. The Angling Trust are petitioning the government for fishing to be allowed. I hope they are successful, as when I watch these videos back, I'm beginning to sound like a self-righteous prig. Yeah, too much Daily Mail, I think.
There's a sort of oldie. I need some exercise. So I'll have a drive out and have a look at the bluebells. I mean, it's a wonderful display, but it's very short-lived before the bracket appears and overwhelms them. But on this lovely day, take care, look after yourselves, see you again. Cheerio.